The sun had barely risen over the dusty hills of Arizona when the small town of Silver Creek came to life. Wagons rattled down the dirt road, and shopkeepers opened their doors to another hot day. But that morning something was different. A crowd had gathered in front of the sheriff's office. People were whispering, pointing, and staring at something tied near a wagon wheel. It was a young Apache woman. Her hands were bound with rough rope, and her ankles were chained to the wagon itself. Her dark hair was tangled from the wind, her clothes torn and dusty from travel, yet her eyes, those sharp, steady eyes, held no fear. She looked at the people staring at her as if she was the one judging them. The townsfolk muttered among themselves. Some said she had been caught stealing horses, others said she had attacked a ranch, but no one really knew the truth. They only saw what they were told to see, an Indian woman treated like a prisoner. A few feet away stood a man named Daniel Hayes, a quiet rancher who lived a few miles outside town. He had come that morning to buy supplies, flour, oats, and fence wire. But now, standing there with the sound of the chains clinking in the air, he felt something twist inside his chest. Daniel was not a man who liked trouble. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept to himself. But he had grown up on the plains. He had seen how easily people could lose their kindness when fear took hold of them. He looked at the young woman, her chin lifted in defiance, and he saw not a criminal, but a human being, proud and silent. He asked the blacksmith, "What happened here?" The blacksmith shrugged. "They say she was caught near the Miller Ranch. Sheriff thinks she was part of a raiding group. Brought her in last night. Guess they're waiting for the army to take her." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Alone? They caught her alone?" "That's what I heard," the man said. "Still, folks don't take chances. You know how it is." Daniel did know. He also knew fear often made people do cruel things. He stood there for a long while, pretending to check his list, but his eyes kept going back to her. She wasn't moving. She wasn't begging or crying. She just sat in the dust, calm and still, as if she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her pain. By noon, the heat grew heavy. People drifted away, bored now that nothing dramatic was happening. Only Daniel remained by his wagon, his hat shading his eyes. He could see the woman's lips cracking from thirst. The deputy sitting near her chewed on a straw, not paying attention. Daniel finally walked toward the sheriff's porch. Sheriff Cook was sitting there with a cup of coffee, boots on the rail, half asleep. "Sheriff," Daniel said softly. "Mind if I ask something?" The sheriff looked up, frowning. "What is it, Hayes?" Daniel pointed toward the chained woman. "How long's she been sitting there?" "Since last night. She's had any water?" The sheriff sighed. "I gave her a drink this morning." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "It's past noon now." "Hayes," the sheriff said, tired, "I get you're a kind man, but this ain't your business. Orders are to keep her till the army picks her up." "We don't know what she's done." Daniel nodded slowly. "And we don't know if she's done anything at all." The sheriff didn't answer. He just looked away. Daniel turned back to his wagon, his mind running. He didn't know what made him care so much. Maybe it was the way she held herself, proud even in chains. Maybe it was because his own mother used to tell him that kindness was worth more than gold in a world that had too little of it. Whatever the reason, he couldn't ride home and forget her. Late that afternoon, as the heat began to fade, he walked toward the wagon again. The deputy had gone to eat, leaving her alone. Daniel took a small canteen from his horse and approached slowly, holding it out. She didn't move. Her eyes watched him, cautious but curious. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "You need water." She hesitated, then looked at the canteen again. Daniel uncapped it and poured a little into the palm of his hand, drinking it himself to show her it was safe. Then he held it out once more. This time she leaned forward slightly. He poured some into her cupped hands. She drank quickly but gracefully, not spilling a drop. Then she looked at him again, her gaze sharp but softer now. For the first time, Daniel saw gratitude flicker in her eyes. He nodded. "You're welcome," a voice shouted from behind. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" It was the deputy returning from the saloon. Daniel stepped back calmly. "Giving her water," he said. The deputy scowled. "Ain't your place. Next time you want to play hero, pick someone who deserves it." Daniel didn't answer. He simply turned and walked away, his boots kicking up dust. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire in his small cabin, the stars bright above the desert sky. He thought of her again, how young she was, how alone. He thought of how she hadn't said a single word, yet somehow she had spoken louder than anyone in that town. The next morning, he rode back to Silver Creek before dawn. The town was quiet, only the sheriff and deputy at their posts. The wagon was still there, and so was she. Her head rested against the wood, her eyes closed. Daniel noticed the bruises around her wrists where the ropes rubbed. He approached the sheriff again. "Cook, how long are you planning to keep her there?" "Army said they'd come today," the sheriff muttered. "Till then, she stays put." "She's no threat," Daniel said quietly. "You could move her inside, at least out of the sun." The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "You sure you want to get mixed up in this, Hayes?" "People talk. Let them," Daniel said. "They always do." The sheriff sighed but finally nodded. "Fine, I'll move her to the cell." Together they unchained her from the wagon. She stood slowly, her legs weak but steady. Daniel noticed she didn't stumble. She walked on her own, head held high. When they brought her inside, she looked around the small jail, bare walls, a single cot, and sat quietly on the bench. Daniel wanted to say something, but words didn't seem enough. So he just nodded and left the cell. That afternoon, while the sheriff waited for the army, a small group of townspeople gathered again. They wanted to see what would happen. Some whispered that she was dangerous. Others said it was all a mistake. But Daniel stood apart, arms crossed, watching everything with calm eyes. When the soldiers finally arrived, they questioned the sheriff and looked at the woman. One of them, a young lieutenant, frowned. "She doesn't fit the description. The one we're looking for was older." The sheriff blinked. "So she's not—" The lieutenant shook his head. "No, let her go." The words hung in the air. The crowd fell silent. Daniel exhaled slowly, feeling something heavy lift off his chest. The sheriff turned toward the woman, unsure what to say. Daniel stepped forward quietly. "I'll take her," he said. The sheriff hesitated. "You sure, Hayes?" Daniel nodded. "She's free now. She needs somewhere safe." The lieutenant agreed and signed the paper. Then, without a word, Daniel walked to the cell, opened the door, and gestured for her to follow. She looked at him, truly looked, and after a long moment she stepped forward. As they walked out of the town together, the people watched in silence. The sun was setting behind the red cliffs, painting the sky in gold. The chains were gone, but the marks on her wrists remained. Daniel didn't say anything. He simply led his horse and let her walk beside him. For the first time since he had seen her, she spoke, her voice soft, careful. "Why did you help me?" Daniel looked at her and smiled faintly. "Because no one else would." She looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. They walked on, side by side, toward the quiet hills beyond Silver Creek. The trail out of Silver Creek stretched far into the open land. Evening light touched the grass and rocks with gold, and the air smelled of dust and sage. Daniel rode his horse slowly beside the Apache woman, who walked in silence. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The only sounds were the steady clop of hooves and the soft rustle of the wind. When they reached a small creek that ran near Daniel's ranch, he stopped. "We'll rest here," he said. The woman looked around, cautious but calm. Daniel dismounted, filled his canteen, and offered her some water. She took it quietly and drank. Then, to his surprise, she handed it back with a small nod of thanks. "I'm Daniel," he said after a moment. "Daniel Hayes." She hesitated before speaking. Her voice was soft, musical. "Nata." Daniel repeated it carefully. "Nata." She gave a faint smile, as if his effort had earned her trust. As the sky turned deep blue, Daniel built a small fire. He roasted a bit of bread and beans and offered her some. At first she didn't take it, but then hunger won over pride. They ate in silence. The stars came out, thousands of them, bright and clear above the desert. Daniel glanced at her from time to time. Her face was calm, but tired. She seemed like someone who had seen too much and said too little. When the fire burned low, Daniel spoke again. "You have a place to go? Family?" She shook her head. "No, they gone. Soldiers took many. Others left the mountains." Daniel felt a deep ache in his chest. He couldn't imagine losing everything like that. "You can stay at my ranch," he said gently. "At least until you know where to go next." Nata looked at him, unsure if she should believe him. Why help me? Daniel smiled a little. Because I can. That night, they both slept under the open sky. The wind blew softly through the grass. Daniel slept lightly, aware of every sound, but peaceful for the first time in a long while. The next morning, they reached his ranch, a quiet stretch of land with a small wooden house, a barn, and wide open fields. A few horses grazed near the fence. It wasn't much, but it was home. This is where I live, Daniel said. You can rest here. Nata looked around. The air smelled of hay and wood smoke. She could hear the chickens clucking behind the barn. Slowly, she nodded. Daniel showed her the small guest room beside the kitchen. It had a bed, a wash bowl, and a single window looking out at the hills. It's not fancy, he said, but it's safe. She smiled faintly. Safe is enough. Over the next few days, Daniel went about his work as usual, fixing fences, tending the horses, repairing tools. Nata helped quietly without being asked. She fetched water, mended small things, and cooked simple meals using whatever he had. She moved with quiet grace, as if she belonged to the land itself. The silence between them was comfortable. Daniel had never been a man of many words, and she didn't seem to need them. Yet, as days passed, a soft friendship began to form, one built not on talk but on small kindnesses. One afternoon, Daniel returned from town with supplies. Got some cloth, he said, setting the bundle on the table. Figured you could use it. Nata ran her hand over the fabric, soft, sky-blue cotton. She looked at him, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Thank you, she said. It's pretty. Daniel smiled. I thought so. As weeks went by, the townsfolk started talking. People always did. Some said Daniel had gone soft. Others whispered questions about the woman living at his ranch. But Daniel didn't care. He'd lived long enough to know that people who talked rarely helped anyone. One morning, while fixing the barn gate, Daniel noticed Nata watching the hills. Her expression was distant, almost sad. Something wrong? He asked. She pointed toward the north. That way. My people used to live there, before soldiers came. We had small homes, gardens. Children laughed there. Daniel leaned on the fence, listening quietly. Do you want to go back? She shook her head. There is nothing left now. Only memories. For a while they stood in silence. Then she turned to him and said, You are different from others here. Daniel gave a soft laugh. Different how? You see people, she said. Not color, not tribe, just people. Her words stayed with him long after she walked away. As summer turned to autumn, life settled into a quiet rhythm. They worked together from sunrise to sunset, shared meals, and sometimes sat by the fire at night while Daniel read from an old book. Nata listened, fascinated by the stories even if she didn't understand every word. One evening she brought out a small leather pouch and opened it. Inside was a smooth stone carved with a simple pattern. She handed it to him. This is from my mother, she said. It means peace. Daniel held it carefully. It's beautiful. She smiled softly. You keep it. You gave peace to me. He didn't know what to say. He just nodded, feeling something warm spread through his chest. But peace never lasted long in places like Silver Creek. One morning a rider came to the ranch, a man from town. He brought news that a new officer at the fort was questioning all who had helped any Apache. Some settlers were angry, saying kindness was weakness. Daniel listened quietly and then thanked the man. After he left, he turned to Nata. You might need to stay out of sight for a while, he said. Just until things calm down. She looked at him, her eyes steady. I trust you. A few days later, soldiers came riding by. They asked questions, checked papers, looked around. Daniel answered calmly, showing his land deeds and keeping his tone even. When one of them asked about any Indian woman, Daniel simply said, No one here but me. The soldiers left after a while, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Nada stepped out from the barn where she had been hiding. "They gone?" she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "Yes, for now." She looked at him with deep gratitude. "You risk for me again." He smiled faintly. "You don't owe me thanks. I just did what's right." That evening, they sat by the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of red and orange. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Nata said, "When I was chained, I thought my life ended, but it began again here." Daniel turned to her. "And I thought my life was already set. Same days, same land. But you reminded me there's still more." They shared a quiet smile, one that said more than words could. Seasons changed again. Winter brought cold winds, but also peace. People in town eventually forgot the rumors. Daniel and Nata continued their quiet life on the ranch, tending the land, caring for animals, living side by side in understanding. Sometimes travelers passing by would see them working together in the fields, a tall rancher and a calm Apache woman, moving in rhythm, like two lives that had somehow found the same song. No one knew their story, but everyone who saw them could feel the quiet strength between them. Years later, people still spoke of Daniel Hayes, the quiet man who once stopped in Silver Creek when everyone else looked away. Some said he changed that town, even if they didn't notice it right away. And those who passed by his ranch often said they heard laughter again, soft, peaceful and free, carried on the wind through the open desert. As for Nata, she stayed. The chains that once held her were long gone, replaced by trust and dignity. She had found something rare, not pity, but respect. Not rescue, but friendship. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the hills, she would take out the smooth carved stone and place it on the porch rail. Daniel would sit beside her, and together they would watch the last light fade. Two souls from different worlds finding peace in a land that had seen too little of it.